"They're gone," Julia Carter whispered, her voice breaking as she stared at the endless desert, wagon tracks erased by the dawn's harsh glow. Her trembling hands gripped a nearly empty water flask, the only thing left beside her in the vast, blistering silence. Sweat burned her eyes, her heart racing with the sting of betrayal as the sun rose, promising a slow death. Why did the people she trusted abandon her here, when just last night they shared a fire? Julia Carter, a young widow, once walked hand in hand with her husband Samuel, dreaming of a new life in the American West, where open plains promised hope. That dream shattered when Samuel fell in an attack, leaving Julia with a broken heart and hollow eyes. The wagon train, people she saw as family, turned their backs on her, deeming her a burden with no value. Left alone in the unforgiving desert with only a dwindling flask of water, no horse and no weapon, Julia faces a creeping death. The pain of losing Samuel blends with the cruel betrayal, thrusting her to the edge of survival, where every second tests her will to live. Julia's eyes snapped open, the desert's chill biting her skin as she scrambled to her feet. The wagon train was gone. No creak of wheels, no murmur of voices, just sand stretching endlessly under the pale dawn. She stumbled forward, kicking at the ground, searching for tracks, but found only her nearly empty water flask glinting mockingly in the light. Her chest tightened, fear clawing as the truth sank in. She was alone. Last night, Caleb Holt's sharp eyes had lingered on her, his voice clipped when she asked about the next day's plan. Now, his absence screamed betrayal. She sank to her knees, tears carving tracks through the dust on her face, her fists pounding the sand as anger surged. How could they leave her to die? But sitting here meant death. She forced herself up, legs shaking, and picked a direction, any direction, her boots sinking into the sand with each step. The sun climbed, its heat pressing down, but she walked, clutching the flask like a lifeline. Her heart ached with Samuel's memory, yet she refused to lie down and let the desert claim her. Each step was a defiance, a desperate grasp at survival, though despair clung to her like the sweat soaking her dress. Why had they turned on her? She pushed forward, driven by raw will, unaware of the eyes watching from the horizon. Julia's boots dragged through the scorching sand, each step a battle against the desert's relentless heat. Her feet blistered inside worn leather, the pain sharp with every move, but she kept walking, her lips cracked and dry. The water flask hung heavy in her hand, its sloshing faint, barely enough for another sip. She tilted it, letting a single drop touch her tongue, savoring it before the thirst returned. Above, a vulture circled, its shadow flickering over the dunes, a grim reminder of what awaited if she stopped. She closed her eyes, picturing Samuel's warm smile, his hand squeezing hers as they dreamed of a new home. "Keep going," she whispered, his memory a spark in her fading strength. Hours blurred, the sun a merciless weight, until her legs buckled, and she collapsed, sand burning her palms. Her vision swam, the flask slipping from her fingers as she gasped, certain this was the end. She curled into herself, whispering Samuel's name, unwilling to surrender but too weak to rise. Then a shadow fell over her, not the vulture's but a man's, tall and silent. Tasso, his Navajo warrior's braid swaying, knelt beside her, his dark eyes unreadable. He lifted her flask, then her, slinging her arm over his shoulder. Her heart raced with fear and faint hope as he carried her toward an unknown fate, the desert's heat fading behind them. Ta! So's grip was firm as he guided Julia through the Navajo village, her legs wobbling from exhaustion. Huts of earth and wood lined the path, their shadows offering brief relief from the sun, but the villagers' stares pierced her. Alza, a woman with sharp features and so stern eyes, stepped forward, her voice low and cutting. "Why bring an outsider here?" Julia's throat tightened, but she forced words out, her voice hoarse, explaining the wagon train's betrayal. Alza's lips pressed thin, her gaze cold, dismissing Julia's story as a lie. So's hand rose, his tone calm but firm, insisting Julia was no danger. The argument hung heavy, and Julia's cheeks burned with shame, feeling like an intruder. They led her to a small hut, its interior cool but bare, and left her with a blanket and a clay cup of water. She sipped slowly, her hand shaking, the village's murmurs seeping through the walls. Later, under moonlight, she crept to the hut's edge, hearing Tasso and Alza's voices clash. "She'll bring trouble," Alza hissed, but Tasso countered. "She's alone, like we once were." Julia's heart sank, the weight of their distrust pressing down. She clutched the blanket, resolving to prove her worth, though fear gnawed at her. Could she earn their trust, or would she remain a stranger in this new world? Julia's hands shook as Tasso pressed a bow into them, its wood rough against her palms. He pointed to a distant tree stump, his voice steady, urging her to aim. Her first arrow flew wide, thudding into the dirt, then another, and another, each miss drawing a flush of shame to her cheeks. Nizha, a young Navajo woman with bright eyes, clapped her hands, her laugh soft as she called out encouragement. Julia's jaw tightened, refusing to quit despite the ache in her arms. Hours passed, the sun dipping low, until her final arrow struck the stump's edge, a dull thwack echoing. Tasso nodded, his face softening, but Alza stood nearby, arms crossed, her gaze cold as stone. Julia's heart lifted, a spark of hope flickering, though Alza's disapproval stung. She gripped the bow tighter, determined to prove she belonged, her fingers tracing the string as she imagined hitting the target dead center next time. The village's quiet hum surrounded her, but the weight of being an outsider pressed hard, her resolve the only thing keeping her upright. Julia's boots slipped on the rocky cliff, loose stones skittering down as she clung to a jagged outcrop. The Navajo warriors climbed ahead, their movement sure, while Alza's voice rang out, mocking her stumble. Julia's face burned, but Nizha scrambled to her side, showing her where to place her feet for balance. Samuel's words echoed in her mind. "Never give up on yourself." She gritted her teeth, hauling herself up, muscles screaming with each pull. Sweat soaked her dress as she reached the top, collapsing onto the flat rock, chest heaving. The warriors glanced her way, some nodding with quiet respect, though Alza's sneer lingered. Julia stood, legs trembling but pride swelling in her chest, the vast desert sprawling below like a challenge met. She met Alza's eyes, refusing to look away, her exhaustion outweighed by a growing strength within. Nizha's fingers wove reeds into a basket, her hands deft as she beckoned Julia to join the circle of Navajo women. Julia hesitated, then knelt, her clumsy attempts at weaving drawing gentle laughs. She spoke of Samuel, her voice catching as she described his warm laugh, tears pricking her eyes. Nizha's hands stilled, her own story spilling out, of a family lost to raiders' bullets. They sat closer, their shared pain knitting them like sisters, the fire's glow warming their faces. Julia hummed a lullaby Samuel loved, teaching Nizha the words, their voices blending softly. Alza watched from the shadows, her stern face softening, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. Julia's heart swelled, the hut's warmth and Nizha's smile wrapping her in a sense of belonging, though the villagers' wary glances still lingered. Alza's shadow loomed over Julia as she stood outside the hut, the evening air thick with tension. "What do you want from us?" Alza's voice was sharp, her eyes boring into Julia's. Swallowing hard, Julia straightened, her voice steady despite her racing heart, insisting she only sought survival, not harm. Altsa's lips curled, recounting tales of settlers who betrayed the Navajo, their promises as empty as the desert wind. Julia's hands clenched, and she spoke of the wagon train's betrayal, her voice cracking as she described waking to nothingness. Altsa's gaze didn't soften, but she nodded curtly, saying she'd watch Julia closely. Tasso stepped forward, his tone firm, defending Julia's honesty, his words sparking a heated glance from his sister. Julia's shoulders sagged under the weight of distrust, but she met Altsa's eyes, vowing silently to prove her loyalty. The village fires flickered, casting long shadows, and Julia returned to her hut, her resolve hardening despite the knot of pressure in her chest. She wouldn't let Altsa's doubt break her. Julia crouched in the brush, her breath shallow as she followed Tasso and Nizha through the dawn-lit scrubland. She mimicked Tasso's silent steps, watching how he glided without snapping a twig. A rabbit darted across the path, and Julia's heart leaped. She raised her bow, fingers trembling, and loosed an arrow. It struck the rabbit clean, pinning it to the earth. Julia's shout of joy echoed, her grin wide as Nizha clapped her shoulder. Tasso's eyes crinkled, his rare smile warm as he praised her shot. Altsa, trailing behind, said nothing, but her usual scowl eased, her arms uncrossing. Julia's chest swelled with pride, the bow feeling lighter in her hands. She knelt by the rabbit, its fur soft under her fingers, and whispered thanks as Tasso had taught her. The desert's vastness seemed less daunting now, the village's distant hum a promise of belonging. Julia stood taller, believing she could earn her place, though Altsa's silent judgment lingered like a cloud. Drums pulsed through the Navajo village as Julia joined the rain ceremony, her stomach twisting with nerves. She stood stiffly among the singers, their voices rising to the starry sky, unsure of her place. Nizha tugged her arm, whispering instructions, guiding her through the steps of the dance. Dahi, the weathered chief, watched from the fire's edge, his expression unreadable. Julia's voice wavered but joined the chant, her body swaying to the rhythm, the desert's chill fading in the community's warmth. Altsa approached, her face softer, and pressed a beaded bracelet into Julia's hand, the gift heavy with meaning. Julia's eyes stung, her fingers tracing the beads, a lump in her throat as she nodded thanks. The firelight danced, and for the first time she felt woven into the village's heartbeat, though fear of the future gnawed at her. She clutched the bracelet, its weight a fragile anchor against the unknown. Tasso's hand rested on Julia's shoulder as they sat by the fire, his question quiet. Would she leave to find another wagon train? Julia's gaze dropped, memories of Caleb Holt's cold stare flooding back, the sting of betrayal sharp. She shook her head, her voice firm, declaring she'd stay and fight for the Navajo, her new home. Nizha's arms wrapped around her, her laughter bright as she called Julia sister. Altsa, standing nearby, gave a slow nod, her eyes holding a grudging respect. Dahi's deep voice cut through, assigning Julia to work with the warriors, his trust a heavy honor. Julia's heart pounded, pride mingling with fear as she realized the wagon train might return. The fire's warmth couldn't chase away the chill of that thought, but she squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever came, her place among the Navajo sealed. Julia's boots crunched on the dry earth as she and Tasso patrolled the desert's edge, the sun low and fierce. She froze, pointing to fresh wagon ruts cutting through the sand. They followed the tracks, crouching behind a ridge as a small camp came into view, Caleb Holt's flag flapping on a wagon. Julia's pulse raced, her fingers tightening around her bow. Tasso's eyes narrowed, whispering that the camp hid something dark. They crept closer, staying low to avoid the sentry's gaze, the air thick with the scent of dust and leather. Julia's fear surged, but her need for truth burned stronger, pushing her to uncover Caleb's plans. They retreated to report, her heart heavy with the threat looming over the village, yet resolute to face it. Moonlight barely pierced the desert's darkness as Julia and Tasso crept toward the wagon train's camp, their shadows blending with the scrub. Julia's heart thudded, her palms slick against the bow she carried, every snap of a twig spiking her nerves. They slipped past a snoring sentry, crouching behind a wagon where wooden crates were stacked. Tasso pried one open, revealing gleaming rifles and boxes of bullets, their metal glinting coldly. Julia's breath caught, her mind flashing to Samuel's lifeless body, shot down in the attack that stole him. These weren't tools for settlers, they were weapons for war. Tasso's eyes hardened, whispering that these guns likely killed Samuel and countless others. Julia's fingers trembled as she lifted a rifle, its weight heavy with proof of the wagon train's treachery. They needed evidence, so Tasso slung the rifle over his shoulder, but a lantern's glow flickered nearby. A guard's shout shattered the silence, his boots pounding toward them. Julia's pulse raced as Tasso grabbed her arm, pulling her into a sprint through the sand. Bullets whizzed past, one grazing her sleeve, tearing the fabric. They dove behind a dune, panting, the camp's chaos fading as the guards lost their trail. Julia clutched her torn sleeve, fear mingling with a burning resolve. The wagon train hid a deadly secret, and she'd expose it, though the thought of pursuit tightened her chest. She followed Tasso back to the village, the rifle a grim promise of truth. Julia stood before the Navajo village's central fire, the stolen rifle lying at Dahi's feet, its barrel catching the flame's glow. Her voice shook as she recounted waking alone in the desert, abandoned by Caleb Holt's wagon train, and finding the weapons that spelled danger. Dahi's weathered face remained still, but Altsa stepped forward, her voice sharp, warning that confronting the settlers could bring death to the village. Julia's stomach twisted, Altsa's doubt stinging, but she pressed on, describing the crates of guns, her hands gesturing to mimic their number. Tasso's deep voice cut through, declaring the weapons a threat to the Navajo's survival. His fist clenched as he spoke of past raids. Nizha, her eyes fierce, leaped to Julia's side, urging the village to act, her words igniting murmurs among the gathered. Julia's heart lifted at Nizha's support, but fear gnawed at her, the weight of potential conflict pressing down. Dahi raised a hand, silencing the crowd, his gaze shifting from the rifle to Julia. He nodded, agreeing to investigate further, and tasked Tasso with leading the effort. Julia exhaled, relief mixing with dread as the village rallied, their unity, fragile but real. She caught Altsa's skeptical glance, her resolve hardening to prove the threat was worth facing. As the fire crackled, Julia's mind raced, fearing the cost of this fight, but she stood taller, ready to protect her new home. Julia, Tasso, and Nizha lay flat behind a rocky outcrop, the desert night cloaking them as they spied on a clearing where wagons gathered. Caleb Holt's voice carried, barking orders to a group of rough-looking mercenaries, their rifles slung casually. Julia's heart pounded, her ear straining as she caught a name: the boss, a shadowy figure behind the weapons. She whispered the words to Tasso, his jaw tightening at the revelation. Nizha, clutching a scrap of cloth, sketched a strange symbol from a crate, her fingers swift but trembling. The air grew tense as a twig snapped under Nizha's knee, and Ben Tanner, a wiry settler, spun toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" he bellowed, raising his gun. Julia's blood ran cold, her hand gripping her bow as Tasso signaled to run. They bolted through the brush, branches clawing at their skin, the mercenaries' shouts echoing behind. Bullets tore through leaves, one nicking Tasso's arm, blood seeping through his sleeve. Julia's legs burned, her breath ragged as they weaved through trees, Nizha stumbling but keeping pace. They slid into a dry creek bed, hearts racing, the pursuit fading as the mercenaries turned back. Julia's hands shook, the symbol on Nizha's cloth a precious clue, but the near capture left her rattled. She bandaged So's arm, guilt gnawing at her for the danger they'd faced. The truth was closer, but so was the enemy, and Julia's resolve hardened to uncover the boss's identity. Ben Tanner's boots thudded as he blocked the narrow trail, his rifle aimed at Julia and So, his sneer lit by the dawn's first light. Julia's heart lurched, but she raised her hands, her voice calm, urging him to listen, insisting she meant no harm. Tanner laughed, his finger tightening on the trigger, calling her a troublemaker who should have died in the desert. So lunged, knocking the rifle aside, but Tanner swung a fist, catching So's jaw. A Navajo warrior, trailing behind, charged forward, only to grunt as Tanner's elbow slammed into his ribs, sending him sprawling. Julia dove for a fallen branch, swinging it at Tanner's knees, toppling him. So pinned him down, his knife at Tanner's throat, demanding to know about the boss. Tanner's eyes darted, his voice a rasp, refusing to name the figure but spitting that Caleb knew Julia was alive. The warrior clutched his side, blood staining his shirt, and Julia's stomach churned, guilt flooding her for his pain. They bound Tanner's wrists with rope, leaving him for the village to handle, and helped the wounded warrior limp back. Julia's hands trembled, the fight's chaos replaying in her mind, Tanner's words a chilling warning. Caleb was coming for her, and the thought tightened her throat, but she squared her shoulders, vowing to face him. The desert silence felt heavier now, each step back to the village a step toward war. Dahi's voice boomed through the village, ordering sentries to double their watch, his eyes scanning the horizon for threats. Julia knelt beside So, her fingers fumbling as he showed her how to load a stolen rifle, its cold steel unfamiliar but heavy with purpose. She fired at a distant target, the recoil jarring her shoulder, but So's nod spurred her to try again. Nizha hauled logs to reinforce the village's wooden fence, her laughter mixing with the thud of hammers as children helped. Balsa, her face grim, drilled a group of women in knife combat, her blade flashing as she demonstrated a strike. Julia paused, her mind racing, and approached Dahi with a plan, a trap to ambush Caleb's men if they attacked, using the village's terrain. She sketched lines in the dirt, showing where archers could hide. Dahi's gaze softened, approving, and So clapped her shoulder, assigning her to plan the archers' positions. Julia's chest tightened, pride battling fear as she walked to the village's edge, mapping vantage points. The sun sank, casting long shadows, and she gripped the rifle, its weight a reminder of the lives at stake. Nizha's cheerful hum nearby couldn't erase Julia's dread of the coming fight, but she steeled herself, organizing the village's defenses with a focus born of necessity. The Navajo were ready, and so was she, though the cost of failure loomed large in her heart. Julia sat close to the fire's glow, its warmth battling the desert's chill as So settled beside her, his silhouette sharp against the flickering flames. She hugged her knees, her voice barely above a whisper, admitting the fear that gnawed at her, the dread that she wasn't strong enough to face Caleb's men. So's eyes softened, and he spoke of a raid years ago when settlers burned half the village, his voice steady but heavy with loss. He pointed to the stars, saying Julia's courage had already changed the Navajo, giving them hope. Her throat tightened, a warmth spreading through her chest as their gazes locked, a silent bond forming in the quiet. They clasped hands, vowing to protect each other no matter the cost, the fire's crackle sealing their pact. Julia's heart steadied, a newfound strength blooming within her, though the weight of the coming fight lingered. She squeezed So's hand, the desert's vastness less daunting with him by her side, her resolve sharpened like a blade. Dust swirled as a Navajo scout burst into the village, his breath ragged as he reported Caleb's wagons approaching. their wheels carving fresh ruts toward the village. Julia's stomach dropped, her mind racing as she realized Caleb aimed to capture her, silencing her knowledge of his crimes. Ta! So's jaw clenched, his voice firm as he proposed an ambush before Caleb reached the village, his hand gripping his bow. Dahi nodded, his weathered face grave, assigning Julia and Tasso to lead the attack. Nizha stepped forward, her eyes blazing, volunteering to join, but Julia's heart sank, fear for her friend's safety gripping her. She forced a nod, gripping her rifle, steeling herself for her first battle, the village's quiet hum now a drumbeat of war. Her hands trembled as she checked her bullets, determination battling dread, knowing lives hung on her plan's success. Julia crouched behind a boulder, Tasso beside her, as they surveyed the narrow pass chosen for the ambush, its high cliffs perfect for archers. They positioned Navajo bowmen along the ridge, their silhouettes blending with the rocks, while Julia clutched her rifle, suggesting a surprise volley to scatter Caleb's men. Tasso agreed, his quick gestures directing the warriors into place. Nizha insisted on acting as bait, her voice fierce despite Julia's protests. Alza's sharp objection rang out, her eyes flashing, but Nizha's stubborn nod silenced her, her braids swinging as she prepared. Dahi approached, his hand resting on Julia's shoulder, his quiet blessing steadying her nerves. Julia's pulse raced, hope flickering as she imagined stopping Caleb, but worry for Nizha gnawed at her. She checked her rifle again, the metal cold against her skin, the cliff's shadows deepening as the enemy drew near, her heart pounding with the weight of the plan. Nizha stumbled into the pass, her cloak torn, feigning a lost traveler as Caleb's wagons rumbled closer, his harsh voice barking orders. Julia peered through her rifle's sights, her fingers steady on the trigger, aiming at Caleb's broad figure, her breath held. Ta! So's sharp whistle signaled the attack, and arrows rained from the cliffs, striking wagons and men, screams piercing the air. Caleb's settlers fired back, their bullets chipping the rocks around Julia, who squeezed the trigger, her shot grazing Caleb's hat, missing his head. Chaos erupted, dust choking the pass as mercenaries, led by Eli Vance, charged from the rear, their rifles blazing. A Navajo warrior grunted, blood blooming on his chest as he fell, his bow clattering. Julia's heart lurched, firing again, her shots wild in the frenzy, desperation driving her to shield Nizha. The Navajo held their ground, but the mercenaries' numbers overwhelmed, their gunfire relentless, forcing Julia to duck as bullets whizzed past. Eli Vance's shout rallied the mercenaries, their boots pounding as they advanced, rifles spitting fire through the dust-choked pass. Julia scrambled to Nizha, grabbing her arm, but a mercenary's bullet grazed her shoulder, pain searing as she stumbled. Ta! So's voice roared, ordering a retreat, his bow firing arrows to cover their escape. Julia dragged Nizha behind a rock, her hands slick with blood, but two Navajo warriors fell, their bodies crumpling under gunfire, their cries cut short. She froze, the sight of their lifeless forms burning into her, her rifle slipping from her grasp. Tasso pulled her back, his grip bruising, as they fled through the cliffs, bullets ricocheting behind. Julia's chest heaved, guilt crashing over her like a wave, blaming herself for the failed plan, for the lives lost. She staggered into the village, Nizha safe but trembling, the weight of defeat crushing her spirit. She sank to the ground, hands covering her face, doubting her strength to fight on, the blood on her shoulder a stark reminder of failure. Julia trudged into the Navajo village, her boots heavy with dust, as the group carried the bodies of two fallen warriors, their lifeless forms draped in blankets. The air grew thick with grief as villagers gathered, their wails piercing the dusk. Alza rushed forward, her face contorted, and shoved Julia's shoulder, her voice raw as she blamed her for the disaster, calling her plan reckless. Julia's chest tightened, guilt choking her, but Nizha slipped beside her, gripping her hand, whispering that the fault lay with Caleb's men, not her. Dahi's deep voice called for unity, urging the village to honor the dead, though his words couldn't lift the heavy silence. Julia slipped away, collapsing by a lone tree, her fingers tracing the scar on her shoulder as Samuel's face filled her mind, his gentle smile a distant comfort. Tasso found her, kneeling silently, then spoke of the warrior's sacrifice, urging her to keep fighting. His steady gaze pulled her from despair, a faint spark of hope rekindling, though the pain of loss clung to her like the desert's chill. She nodded, wiping her tears, vowing to honor the fallen, her resolve fragile but growing. Julia sat cross-legged in Dahi's hut, the fire's glow casting shadows as she and Tasso recounted the ambush's chaos. So's voice was grim, admitting the mercenaries' strength outmatched their expectations, their rifles cutting through the Navajo like a storm. Julia leaned forward, her hands clenched, suggesting they target Caleb's weaknesses, perhaps his supply lines. Nizha, sitting nearby, piped up, her eyes bright as she recalled a strange symbol on the weapon crates, sketching it in the dirt. So's brow furrowed, suspecting a hidden arsenal fueling Caleb's power, his finger tracing the symbol as if it held answers. Julia's heart quickened, a new path forming, though fear of another failure loomed. Dahi nodded, his weathered hands folding, and tasked Julia and Tasso with finding this cache, his trust, a heavy mantle. Julia exhaled, the symbol burned into her memory, a beacon of purpose despite the dread of facing Caleb's forces again. She stepped outside, the night air sharp, her mind racing with plans, determined to turn their loss into a chance for victory. Julia and Tasso followed wagon ruts through the desert, their steps cautious as the tracks led to a shadowed valley, its cliffs hiding a sprawled encampment. They crouched behind a boulder, Julia's breath catching as she spotted crates stacked high, guarded by men with rifles slung across their chests. The scale of the operation hit her, rows of weapons gleaming under torchlight, enough to arm an army. She whispered to Tasso, her voice tight, realizing this was the heart of the smuggling ring that killed Samuel. Nizha, who had insisted on joining, crept closer, her eyes wide, and urged blowing the cache to cripple Caleb's plans. So's nod was reluctant, his low voice warning of the guards' numbers and traps. Julia's fingers dug into the dirt, her resolve steeling for Nizha, for the village, for Samuel's memory. They retreated to plan, her heart pounding with hope, tempered by the risk of facing such a fortified target. The valley's torchlight flickered like a taunt, but Julia's fear fueled her determination to strike back, no matter the danger. Julia sketched a map in the sand, her voice steady as she proposed a night raid on the weapons cache, using darkness to mask their approach. Tasso selected a small team, pointing to Julia, Nizha, and 3 seasoned warriors, his eyes sharp with focus. Nizha volunteered to lead the approach, her boldness making Julia's stomach twist with worry. Ulsa, overhearing, stormed over, her voice low but fierce, warning of Eli Vance's mercenaries and their brutal tactics. Julia absorbed the caution, then sat with Tasso, learning to craft fire traps, her hand smearing pitch on cloth to ignite quickly. The team trained under moonlight, practicing silent signals and quick strikes, their movements syncing like a dance. Julia's rifle felt heavier now, its purpose clear, but Nizha's eager grin haunted her. She tightened her grip, the plan solidifying, her confidence growing despite the specter of loss. The village slept, unaware of the strike ahead, and Julia stood watch, her heart a mix of readiness and dread, knowing the raid could change everything. Julia knelt alone in the quiet dawn, her eyes closed as she pictured Samuel's grave, whispering a prayer for strength, her fingers brushing the sand as if touching his memory. Nizha approached, pressing a small Navajo charm into Julia's palm, its carved stone cool and grounding, a silent wish for safety. Tasso joined them, his voice low as he spoke of his father, killed defending the village, his sacrifice, a fire that drove him still. Julia's throat tightened, and she promised to keep Nizha safe, her words fierce despite the fear in her gut. Dahi gathered the team, his hands raised, voice resonant as he spoke of the village's survival resting on their success. Julia felt the weight of his words, her rifle slung across her back, the charm tucked close. Her heart pounded, resolve burning through her doubts, but the thought of losing Nizha or anyone else clawed at her. The team moved out, the desert silence swallowing their steps, each one a step toward a fight that could save or doom them all. Stars vanished behind the valley's cliffs as Julia led her team through the darkness, her boots silent on the sandy path. She moved like a hunter, eyes scanning for movement, her bow gripped tight, the Navajo charm from Nizha tucked against her chest. Nizha crept to a side entrance, her hands swift as she rigged a fire trap, smearing pitch-soaked cloth across the gate. Tasso raised a hand, splitting the group. He and two warriors veered left, while Julia and Nizha stayed right. A flicker of torchlight revealed a mercenary guard, his rifle glinting as he paced near the arsenal's entrance. Julia's pulse hammered, but she signaled to duck behind a crate, her breath shallow as the guard's boots crunched past, oblivious. They inched closer, the stack of weapon crates looming like a fortress, their wooden edges rough under her fingers. Hope surged in Julia's chest, the plan unfolding smoothly, but tension coiled tight, every shadow a potential threat. She glanced at Nizha, whose determined nod steadied her, and they pressed forward, the valley's silence a fragile shield against the danger lurking within. Julia struck a flint, the spark igniting Nizha's fire trap, flames roaring across the side gate, sending guards scrambling. Nizha notched an arrow, her shot swift, dropping a mercenary with a choked gasp, his rifle clattering. Tasso kicked through the arsenal's main door, wood splintering, and led the warriors inside, their knives flashing in the torchlight. Crates of rifles and kegs of powder filled the space, their stench sharp. Julia shoved a fuse into a powder keg, her hands steady despite her racing heart, ready to blow the cache sky high. Shouts erupted outside, and Eli Vance's voice boomed, his mercenaries charging, rifles blazing. Bullets tore through the door, splintering wood, and Julia dove behind a crate, firing her rifle, the recoil bruising her shoulder. The Navajo fought fiercely, arrows and bullets crossing in a deadly dance. But Vance's men closed in, their numbers overwhelming. Julia's hope flickered, the initial success crumbling under the ambush, her eyes darting to Nizha, who stood exposed, lighting another fuse. Vance's mercenaries surged, their gunfire relentless, a Navajo warrior crumpling, blood pooling beneath him as his knife fell. Julia screamed Nizha's name, lunging to pull her back, but a crate collapsed, pinning Nizha's leg. Bullets whizzed, one grazing Julia's arm, pain flaring as she yanked at the debris, her hands slipping in desperation. Nizha's eyes met hers, fierce and calm, and she shoved Julia away, striking a flint to light the fuse. A deafening blast shook the valley, flames engulfing the arsenal, crates exploding in a shower of sparks. Nizha vanished in the fire, her silhouette swallowed by smoke. Julia's scream tore her throat, her knees buckling as Tasso dragged her back, his grip bruising. Mercenaries fired through the chaos, their shouts fading as the explosion's heat scorched the air. Julia's vision blurred with tears, Nizha's sacrifice searing her soul, the partial destruction of the arsenal, a bitter victory. Tasso pulled her through the smoke, her heart shattered, the weight of loss crushing her as they fled the inferno. Tasso hauled Julia through the valley, bullets cracking against rocks as mercenaries pursued, their lanterns bobbing like wolves' eyes. Julia stumbled, her legs leaden, blood trickling from her arm, but Tasso caught her, his strength unyielding. A mercenary shot grazed his shoulder, blood staining his shirt, yet he pushed on, guiding them to a shallow cave. They collapsed inside, the surviving warrior panting, his face grim. Julia curled against the cold stone, sobs racking her. Nizha's charm clutched in her fist as she whispered apologies, blaming herself for the plan's collapse. Tasso knelt, his voice soft but firm, saying Nizha died for the village, her courage of fire to carry forward. His words pierced her despair, but guilt clung, heavy as the cave's darkness. The mercenaries' shouts faded, their search moving elsewhere, leaving silence to wrap the group. Julia's tears slowed, her resolve flickering, a fragile thread keeping her from breaking, though Nizha's absence was a wound that wouldn't heal. Julia staggered into the village, her face streaked with ash, the surviving warrior limping beside her. Alza ran forward, her eyes searching, then froze as Tasso shook his head, confirming Nizha's death. Alza's wail shattered the dawn, collapsing over Nizha's body, brought back on a blanket, her braid singed. Julia stepped forward, her voice breaking as she begged forgiveness, but Alza surged up, shoving her back, screaming that Julia's recklessness killed her sister. Dahi's call for calm cut through, his hands raised, but grief hung thick, villagers weeping softly. Julia fled to her hut, sinking to the floor, clutching Nizha's charm, its edges biting her palm. Memories flooded her, Nizha's laugh, her fierce hugs, her voice singing Samuel's lullaby. Julia's sobs echoed, guilt consuming her, believing she'd brought death to her friend. The village's mourning chants drifted through the walls, each note a reminder of her failure, her heart heavy with the cost of her choices. Julia sat hunched in her hut, the Navajo charm from Nizha clutched so tightly its edges cut into her palm, her tear-streaked face lit by a single candle's flicker. Footsteps crunched outside, and Tasso ducked through the doorway, his silhouette filling the space as he knelt beside her, his eyes soft with understanding. He spoke of his father's death, his voice low, recounting how grief nearly broke him, yet he fought on for the village. He touched the charm in her hand, saying Nizha's spirit urged Julia to keep battling, her sacrifice a call to justice. Julia's sobs quieted, her fingers loosening around the charm, its weight now a reminder of duty, not just pain. She nodded, whispering she'd fight for Nizha, her voice cracking but resolute, the fog of despair lifting slightly. So's hand rested on her shoulder, promising to stand with her until the end, his steady presence a lifeline. Julia wiped her eyes, pain still raw but tempered by a renewed fire, her heart set on avenging Nizha, even as grief lingered like the desert's chill. She stood, gripping her rifle, ready to face the fight ahead with Tasso at her side. Dahi's hut was thick with the scent of sage as Julia and Tasso sat before him, the fire casting long shadows across the dirt floor. Tasso reported the arsenal's partial destruction, his voice grim, noting that Caleb's organization remained a threat, its roots deep. Julia leaned forward, her hands clasped, proposing they hunt the mysterious boss to cut the smuggling ring at its source, her eyes fierce despite the ache in her chest. Tasso nodded, recalling the symbol etched on the crates, tracing it in the dirt, its sharp angles hinting at a powerful figure. Julia's pulse quickened, suspicion growing that this boss held sway beyond the desert, perhaps in the town's halls. Dahi's weathered face tightened, assigning them to uncover final proof, his trust a heavy charge. Julia's hope flickered, a new target sharpening her focus, but fear of another failure gnawed at her, the memory of Nizha's death, a constant shadow. She memorized the symbol, her fingers brushing the charm, determination battling dread as she stepped into the night. The village is quiet, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. Ben Tanner stumbled into the village, his hands raised, his face gaunt as he begged for mercy, claiming he'd fled Caleb's men. Julia's eyes narrowed, her rifle half raised, distrust burning as she remembered his sneer on the trail. Tasso grabbed Tanner's collar, his knife glinting, demanding answers about the boss. Tanner's voice shook, revealing a secret meeting between Caleb and the mastermind, set for tomorrow at a remote ranch. Julia's heart raced, the chance to unmask the enemy tantalizing. But Tanner's shifty eyes screamed betrayal. Dahi stepped forward, his voice calm but firm, granting Tanner a chance to redeem himself by guiding them, his fate tied to their success. Julia's grip on her rifle tightened, hope surging at the opportunity, yet fear of a trap coiled in her gut. She studied Tanner's trembling hands, weighing his words, her resolve hardening to seize this lead, no matter the risk. The village's fires burned low, and Julia's mind churned, plotting the next move. Her trust in Tanner thin as the desert's dawn. Julia traced lines in the sand, outlining a plan to infiltrate the secret meeting, her voice steady as she described sneaking in disguised as settlers. Ben Tanner, bound nearby, nodded eagerly, promising to lead them to the ranch for his freedom, his eyes darting nervously. Alsa, her face stern, taught Julia to wrap a shawl and smudged dirt on her face, blending her into the settler crowd, her hands brisk but gentle. Tasso selected a handful of elite warriors, their bows and knives hidden under cloaks, his commands sharp as he drilled their roles. Dahi's voice rumbled, warning of the boss's influence, his eyes grave as he urged caution. Julia's chest tightened, vowing to bring justice for Nizha, her fingers brushing the charm tucked in her pocket. The team gathered weapons, their movements precise, the village's quiet hum a backdrop to their preparations. Julia's heart pounded, readiness mixing with dread, the weight of the mission pressing down, but her focus was razor sharp, every detail of the plan etched in her mind. She adjusted her shawl, the desert's chill seeping through, her resolve afire against the fear of facing an unknown enemy. Julia pulled her shawl tighter, her face smudged with dirt, as she followed Ben Tanner through the desert, his steps hesitant under the moon's pale light. Tasso and the warriors trailed behind, their forms ghost-like among the scrub, bows ready beneath their cloaks. They reached an abandoned ranch, its sagging barn lit by lanterns, voices murmuring inside. Julia's breath hitched as she spotted Caleb, his broad frame unmistakable, beside a tall man in a fine coat, Nathaniel Grey. She crept closer, hiding behind a rusted plow, catching Grey's cold voice ordering the Navajo's destruction, his words dripping with authority. Her blood ran cold, realizing Grey was a high-ranking official, his power far beyond Caleb's. Tanner's nervous glance flickered toward her, and she gripped her knife, heart racing, hope of exposing Grey warring with fear of his influence. The barn shadows cloaked her, but each creak of wood spiked her nerves, the truth within reach yet dangerously out of grasp. Julia crouched behind the rusted plow, her heart pounding as she peered into the barn, where Nathaniel Grey's papers lay on a table, their edges curling in the lantern light. She darted forward, her fingers brushing a document, memorizing the sharp symbol etched on it, her breath shallow to avoid detection. She snatched a list detailing smuggling routes, tucking it inside her shawl, its weight like a stone against her chest. Ben Tanner's sudden gasp broke the silence, his foot scuffing the dirt, drawing a mercenary's sharp glance. So's hand flashed, signaling stillness, his eyes fierce as he pressed against a beam, urging calm. Julia froze, slipping the document deeper into her clothes, her pulse racing as a mercenary strode toward her, his boots heavy on the creaking floor. She lowered her gaze, feigning a settler's meekness, her knife hidden but ready, and he passed, muttering about the wind. Her knees trembled with relief, the evidence secured, but the near discovery left her shaken, the barn's shadows a maze of danger as she signaled retreat, the truth now in her grasp, yet perilously close to slipping away. Caleb's eyes widened, locking onto Julia as she lingered too long near the table, his shout booming through the barn. "It's her!" Julia bolted, kicking over a table, lanterns crashing, flames licking the dry wood as chaos erupted. Tasso and the Navajo warriors burst from the shadows, arrows flying, one pinning a mercenary's arm to a post with a scream. Rifles cracked, bullets splintering beams, and Julia ducked low, her rifle raised, firing at Caleb as he charged, her shot tearing through his shoulder, blood spraying. He roared, stumbling but swinging a pistol, its barrel flashing as he fired, grazing Tasso's leg. The barn became a battlefield, Navajo knives clashing with mercenary blades, blood staining the dirt. Julia reloaded, her hands shaking, but Caleb slipped through a side door, his curses fading into the night, wounded but alive. Julia's chest heaved, victory within reach, yet Grey's absence gnawed at her. The fights cost heavy as she rallied the warriors, determined to finish what they started. Julia and Tasso sprinted through the forest, branches snapping underfoot as they chased Nathaniel Grey, his fine coat a fleeting shadow ahead. Grey shouted for his mercenaries, their boots thundering, rifles firing wildly, bullets shredding leaves around Julia. She dropped to one knee, her hunter's instincts sharp, and loosed an arrow, catching a mercenary in the thigh, his scream echoing as he fell. So charged Eli Vance, their knives clashing, sparks flying as So's blade sliced Vance's arm, forcing him to his knees with a grunt. Julia reached Grey, tackling him into the dirt, her knife at his throat as she bound his wrists with rope, his polished boots scuffing uselessly. Grey's voice dripped venom, warning of his untouchable power, his eyes cold as steel. Julia's heart raced, triumph close but shadowed by fear of his influence, the forest's darkness pressing in as they dragged him back, the weight of his threats lingering like a storm on the horizon. Julia stood tall in the Navajo village, Grey bound before the central fire, as settlers from nearby wagons gathered, their faces wary. She unfolded the stolen document, her voice clear, reading aloud Grey's orders to arm raiders, his signature damning him. Gasps rippled through the settlers, their murmurs turning to anger as they recognized names of lost kin tied to Grey's schemes. Grey sneered, claiming his authority shielded him, but So's sharp retort, backed by the document's evidence, silenced him. Julia's hands trembled, Nizha's charm in her pocket a steadying force, as she met the settlers' eyes, their trust shifting away from Grey. Dahi stepped forward, his voice resolute, declaring Grey would face justice beyond the village. Julia's chest swelled, justice for Nizha and Samuel within reach. The fire's glow a beacon of truth, though the battle's scars ached deep within her. Caleb's wounded roar echoed as he led a final assault on the village, his mercenaries' rifles blazing, bullets tearing through the wooden fence. Julia rallied the Navajo, her rifle steady as she fired from a rooftop, dropping a mercenary with a clean shot, his body slumping in the dust. Tasso met Caleb in the village square, their fight brutal. Caleb's knife slashing So's arm, blood dripping, but Tasso countered, slamming Caleb's wounded shoulder, forcing him to his knees. Julia leaped down, her rifle trained, firing a warning shot that grazed Caleb's leg, his scream sharp as he dropped his weapon. Bound and broken, Caleb spat the truth. Grey ordered Samuel's death to silence his suspicions. Julia's heart shattered, pain flooding her, but she held her ground, the village secure. The mercenaries fled, their morale broken, and Julia knelt by Tasso, bandaging his arm, her hands steady despite the grief, satisfied that the truth, though bitter, was finally hers. Dust settled over the Navajo village as Nathaniel Grey and Caleb Holt knelt in chains, their faces grim under the noon sun, facing a council of settlers and Navajo elders. Gray's smug defiance crumbled as Dahi read the stolen documents aloud, detailing his orders to arm raiders, each word a hammer striking his empire of smuggling, now collapsed into ruin. Caleb, bloodied and broken, hung his head, his confession of Samuel's murder echoing, a final admission that brought justice for Nizha, Samuel, and countless others lost to their greed. Julia stood among the Navajo, her rifle at rest, as Alsa placed a feathered band across her brow, naming her a warrior, the village's cheers a warm embrace, her heart swelling with belonging to this new home. Nizha's charm rested against her chest, a bitter-sweet weight, her sacrifice, and those of 4 fallen warriors casting a quiet sorrow, yet their memory stirred a deep compassion in the gathered crowd, their tears mingling with resolve. Settlers, once deceived, clasped hands with the Navajo, pledging peace, their shared grief forging a fragile alliance to end the desert's bloodshed. Julia mounted a horse, her eyes tracing the horizon, pain for Samuel and Nizha tempered by purpose, her strength a beacon of resilience. She spurred the horse forward, galloping across the sand, her gaze steady, the desert no longer a threat but a canvas for a future built on courage and unity, her silhouette fading into the golden light.